mutually beneficial. The last point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is that in some of these countries, they tend to treat third world countries as third world. So you find in an airport, Kenya is slotted a very far outmost part of the airport. We must encourage, when we are finalizing these agreements, that as much as we give prominence to their airlines, also the same reciprocal arrangement should be there to our airlines when they are in that country, so that we are not put on the back burners of the airport. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand to support in totality that this ratification of bilateral air services agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas will indeed benefit Kenya. It is actually just the other day that Kenya Airways are flying direct to United States of America. And this will indeed support business people. And of course, this protocol will go in hand in mutual benefits in our own country. I'm only encouraging business people, especially those who are growing cash crops, flowers, just but to mention a few, to get engaged in these businesses so that they transport their cash crops to Bahamas, Jordan, Jamaica, just but to mention a few. Having said that, personally, I've traveled all over the world, but I want Kenya to be not to be third world country. I want us to go to second world now because we are doing great in business. So Kenya is being ranked the most developing country in terms of air services. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, I indeed support in totality, and may God bless you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Very well. Let's have Honorable Pasaris Rosana, member for Nairobi City.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand to support the ratification of bilateral air services agreements between Kenya, Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas, and the protocol amending air services agreement between Kenya and Turkey. I happened to transit last night in Istanbul, and the amount of traffic that was in that airport shows me that Kenya can only benefit if it has agreements with countries that actually are transit points if we market ourselves properly. These bilateral agreements should be enhanced with desks in the various airports that have a lot of passengers transiting. And then that way we can actually market our country. So I think there's a need to also go a further step, because we always go and market Kenya in the World Tourism events. But I feel that airports like Emirates, Dubai, Hong Kong, Istanbul are airports that if our country was progressive, we would actually have, even in the duty-free, items of Kenya to actually show people that Kenya exists, and you can not just transit here, but also look at Kenya as a destination. Another thing that I think this will do well is also to have Kenya Airways look at its competitiveness. It is always very, very difficult for me when I think of traveling to look at the prices of all the airlines, and I find Kenya Airways is always the most expensive airline in terms of pricing. So I think while they have these agreements, Kenya Airways should also try and ensure that the prices that they offer to the citizens are also brought down, so that they are also not taken out of the market in terms of competitiveness. And in terms of tourism, when we look at Bahamas and Jamaica, these are tourist destinations. Kenyans themselves are really, the tourism industry in this country has been held strong in its harshest times by Kenyans. Kenyans actually decided to go on holiday, but unfortunately, they are the ones who are charged the most. I actually once went to stay at a hotel in Mombasa, and I booked it locally. And I ended up paying 3 times the amount that my sister, who was coming from the UK, had booked the same hotel. So I feel that these bilateral agreements are an opportunity to enhance the industry, to bring the prices down, to increase competitiveness, and to actually also allow Kenyans to look at alternatives. Because if we find that the hotel industry in Kenya actually penalizes Kenyans for wanting to enjoy their own facilities, then these will open out areas for Kenyans to go also, not only to enjoy themselves, but also to look at opportunities in terms of trade and exchanges. Bilateral agreements are about improving the country and getting our economy enhanced, and also creating opportunities for employment and trade. So I stand to support the bilateral agreements between the various countries, and I ask Kenya, we need to pull up our socks, and we need to ensure that we are competitive, and that we also embrace Kenyans in terms of travel and in terms of enjoying the facilities that we have in our various tourist destinations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Very well. Honorable Omulele Christopher.
Thank you, Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to support this motion by our Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing. I had my brother, the Honorable Amalwa, positing that this is an agreement that should probably emanate from the Foreign Affairs and Defense Department. But I think this is the correct place where it should emanate from, considering that this kind of agreements are supervised and entered into under the mandate of the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, which is domiciled under the transport docket. And therefore, this agreement is proper, and it is to be supported. Other than that, Honorable Speaker, the purpose of this kind of agreement is that air transport has become the real way of the world communicating, and the people of the world really meeting, the world having become a global village. And it is heavily regulated. One cannot visit another country without there being formal agreements between those 2 countries, so that people from one region, one country, can visit the other one under a regulated and formal agreement such as this. So it is proper that our people, Kenyans, can now visit the Bahamas, Jamaica, Jordan, Turkey, under these protocols that we have now entered into. This is the way of the world. But, Honorable Speaker, other than this, and supporting this, because this is expanding the latitude within which Kenyans can operate in the world. Other than that, Honorable Speaker, I would urge the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, and really the Ministry of Transport, and the government of Kenya, to look into a way in which, to start with, to entice the entire Africa, so that we can open the African airspace to all Africans to fly without necessarily going into this kind of protocols. Because, Honorable Speaker, in Africa, you find that, and a perfect example is the existing situation between Kenya and Tanzania, where Kenya Airways is really limited in the way that it can, the number of times that it can access the Tanzanian airspace. And the same way, the Tanzanian air operators are also limited in the way that they can access the Rwandan airspace. The Kenya Airways is limited in the way that it can operate in the equatorial New Guinea. It is limited in the way that it can access the Lesotho airspace. Yet Africa is such a small country, And that is why, really, Honorable Speaker, Kenya Airways, when you look at it, the structure that it runs, it is actually set up to fail. It cannot make profit because of the limited spaces that it can operate with. If Africa was opened up, all the airspace in Africa was available for the operators to operate without limitations, then these operators would be able to make a profit. And that is why the operators in Europe today, Honorable Speaker, are able to offer very competitive prices for tickets. If you go to Europe, Honorable Speaker, you will note that flying anywhere within Europe, probably from Italy to Ukraine or to London, you would hardly spend more than $200, $300. But when you fly from Kenya Jomo Kenyatta Airport to Bujumbura, you will find that we are spending $1,000, a distance that is hardly a quarter of the distance between Italy and Ukraine. Yet from Ukraine to Italy, you will have an economy ticket at probably about $200. And you also find that some of our African countries have entered into agreements with these European operators where they are enjoying that kind of waivers on charges, so that you find that people flying from Ukraine all the way to Egypt here in Cairo are paying fares as low as $200, a distance which is almost a continent away. But when you fly from Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta Airport, to Cairo, you will be lucky if you paid $100,000, which is equivalent to about $1,000. So it is a question of Africans first. We must come together as Africans and find a way to open the skies. It is called an open sky policy. And this is what we must sue for. And I urge, and we must urge our transport committee to put together the players in this field, so that this must be the agenda that must be pursued if Kenya Airways is going to be viable, if the African operators, air operators, are going to be viable. Otherwise, the field is tilted. The European operators will always have an advantage where they operate in Europe. Europe now is an open, all of it is open for the European operators. Yet Africa, we are putting ourselves in steel jackets, where we are saying our Kenyan airspace cannot be approached by operators from Tanzania. Today now we are having questions about the Burundi government questioning why our budget airline, how it's going to access its airspace. This should not be. If we want to build Africa, if we want to build our economies, if we want to build our airlines, we must sue and open our skies in an open sky policy. So our transport chair and his committee, this is a challenge for you, but this is a good thing. I support.
Very well. Honorable Jeremiah Kioni.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to contribute to this.
And Honorable Nyikal, prepare yourself.
Report. And Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm getting help from my neighbor, but he's given me even the wrong one. You're giving me the wrong one. You're misreading me. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this report. I want to thank the committee for the work that they have done on tabling this ratification on the bilateral air service agreements between Kenya and Jordan, Kenya and Jamaica, Kenya and Bahamas, and the one amending the air services agreement between Kenya and Turkey. Mr. Speaker, you will recall that before the new constitution, these agreements or protocols will be entered by the civil servants, but the Kenyans will never get to know what has been done and why it has been done. We want to thank the committee for the work they have done. Now, even as we debate it on the floor of this House, we are able to let Kenyans know that we have those protocol agreements between ourselves and the countries that we have mentioned, which was one of the reasons why all treaties ratified must again be brought to this House, so that Kenyans can also get to know where it is that we have agreements or where it is that they can move with some ease. Mr. Speaker, the countries that we have mentioned, Jamaica, Bahamas, Turkey, Jordan, all those countries have their own unique qualities that Kenyans will start to benefit from by signing these agreements. Jamaica, if for nothing else, we know that we are an athletic country and we do the long distances while the Jamaicans do the short distances. This agreement will certainly help us benefit from each other. It is because once the air travel becomes easy, means our people can be able to move from one country to the other. And again, Jamaica is also a tourist hub, and meaning that tourists moving to Jamaica can also find their way with ease to our country. And I am sure and I hope this protocol also addresses the issues of visa. And other colleagues have mentioned the cost of visa and even the ease of getting them. We need to make sure that our people can move with more ease. Bahamas, again, Mr. Speaker, is a tourist hub. And Kenya is also known as a tourist hub, again, linking two countries that have a lot in common, and meaning that we can benefit from that. Jordan, we know it as those of us who are Christians, has religious, it's a place that those who confess some form of faith can go and visit. Not to mention that, of course, also that we know that Turkey is really growing fast as an economic hub. But having mentioned that, Mr. Speaker, I know our committee has looked at the legal background to ensure that all these agreements have been entered into properly and all the relevant statutes have been adhered to, and we are standing on good ground. But it's instructive to note that the protocol like the one for Jordan, Mr. Speaker, was entered into back in the year 2008. It has taken well over 8 years to get the protocol tabled in this House. The one for Turkey was done in the year 2014, Bahamas 2016, and you can actually see that while 2016 does not look way off, you'd want to ask yourself, why is it that it takes 2 years to get a protocol signed between our countries brought to this parliament? That kind of delay does not help us. It does not serve this country well. It doesn't show that those responsible or those in charge of the process are treating these exercises with the seriousness that they deserve. I think it is important to be more prudent when we come to ensuring that we are bringing the documents on time. Mr. Speaker, we have the organization called, or the team called Blood Kenya. And at times, and I wish the members ahead of me could just give me some peace or choose to relocate. They have just chosen to come and speak in front of me. Why wouldn't they just relocate, or if they can't listen? And they are the ones who summoned us to come to this parliament today. You can't call us here to come and make noise to us instead of listening to what we are saying. But, Mr. Speaker, I think I've had enough of Barire now. I can move on. We have the team called Blood Kenya, and you wonder what it is that they are doing for our country. When you go on this DSTV, and I hope it is there on other channels, there is a channel called Lifestyle, a channel, I think, on lifestyle. And I took some time last week to watch. They had documented the tourism in this country. And even to myself, I did not know that you can have breakfast with the giraffes in Kenya. And it's just happening here, outside here at the Giraffe Center. A very unique thing in the country. And if Blood Kenya would take some time to market us across the country, across the world, I am certain that this country can do wonders. We can be able to grow our tourism sector by big folds. This protocol, without doubt, guarantees that we will have some job opportunity for our people, and especially our young people, and we hope that that becomes a reality. The quality of our flights, Mr. Speaker, I would want to take the opportunity to also talk to KenQ and say that some of our aircrafts are really wanting. You would want them to improve the quality of the flights in terms of facilities and service, and also in terms of keeping time. They are deferred to as our matatus because you can book and not be able to leave on time. So, Mr. Speaker, even as we round the committee for the work that they have done, it is important that all that is required to be done to benefit fully from this protocol is done. The relevant agencies within the ministries do their all so that we can benefit to the maximum as a country. With those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support and again thank the committee led by Mr. Posing for the good work that they have done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So we have Honorable Nikal, member for Seme.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to support the adoption of the report of the Departmental Committee on Transport, Public Works and Housing on the ratification of the bilateral air services agreements between Kenya and Jordan, Kenya and Jamaica, Kenya, Bahamas, and the protocol amending the agreement between Kenya and Turkey. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this, and I also accept that it is important enough to come in a special session. Because, Mr. Speaker, if you look at this air services agreement, the Kenya-Jordan one was done in 2008. The Kenya-Jamaican one is in 2014. The Kenya-Bahamas one was in 2016. And the one between Kenya and Turkey was first done in 2009. And now there's an amendment which again was proposed in 2015. All this time, what has been happening? And Mr. Speaker, even then, we realized that as soon as they were actually initialed, then MOUs were entered into. So basically, we have been operating all these agreements through MOUs, which should not be. And looking at our new constitution, that is something that should have been brought to this House much earlier than that. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I do support that. And further, I support this adoption because it is in principle in line with our policy of integrated national transport policy, which actually seeks to liberalize air transport and also to improve our safety. Again, that's something that should have been done a long time ago. Again, these agreements are all in line with our law and constitution. And Mr. Speaker, on a broader sense, again, they are also in line with the African agreement, the Yamoussoukro decision, which was done in 1999 and endorsed by African heads of states in 2002, that seeks to ease transport in Africa, improve the safety, lower fares. So, Speaker, if you look at the fares that we have even within this country, I can tell you the fare for Kenya Airways between Kisumu and Nairobi, or Kisumu, Nairobi and Mombasa. Actually, one time, I used exactly the same amount to travel from New York to Seattle in Washington State, a journey of 6 hours. And this, in this country, is just a journey of 30 minutes. So these fares are out of this world. So we don't only look at the countries mentioned, but what about within Africa? And that decision that was made in Yamoussoukro, actually, we should look at it. Again, we need to look at inter-African movement. Many times when you want to go from one African state to another, you may have to even to go through Europe. And we need to actually increase this inter-African movement so that we can enhance the movement of people, movement of goods, trade, and even jobs. And Mr. Speaker, this we need to look at, and you look at the airlines in Africa, some of them are so small because they were started on the basis of nationalism and not really the capacity to actually do a business as big and as serious as airline. And therefore, they were limited in scope and limited in capacity. This Yamoussoukro agreement actually is encouraging African countries to link up with the small airlines and strengthen the big airlines like Kenya Airlines, Kenya Airways, Ethiopian Airlines, and South African Airlines. And I think we need to go in that direction. So, Speaker, these agreements, again, are in line with the International Civil Aviation Organization, that is the United Nations organization that regulates air transport. We cannot live in an island. So that when we get things that are in line with the international organization and treaties that we are part of, we must bring them quickly into our law. Again, they're in line with the International Air Transport Association. I know we are members. Our airline is a member of IATA. Again, we must get these agreements in line with that. But Mr. Speaker, let me talk a little more about the open skies for Africa. It is actually a pity within Africa that you actually don't have the movement that is needed within Africa to facilitate, improve, and develop African trade. And yet, we have this the decision which was done in Yamoussoukro in 1999. And AU now put its agenda for 2063. You know, Mr. Speaker, sometimes you look at the way we do things in Africa and you wonder why we cannot improve infrastructure and the transport in Africa. In fact, this agreement was supposed to come into place and to start this year. I'm not sure that has started. So as we sign this agreement, I think we must look at the bigger African picture. And as a continent, if we bring our things together, I think we'll make a lot more impact for the people of Africa. We have agreements in place. We then sign them, we delay to ratify them, and even after we have done that, we don't implement them. So, Mr. Speaker, I do support the adoption of this report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion on the ratification of the BASA or bilateral air services agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas. And I want to start by saying that, Mr. Speaker, this issue is a matter that is of great interest to me. Having had the privilege of being an assistant minister in the last regime in the Ministry of Transport, where I was actually assistant minister in charge of civil aviation, and also later another 5 years as an assistant minister for tourism. And so I fully appreciate the amount of work that goes with the negotiations allowed BASA or bilateral air services agreements, and even the time it takes, Mr. Speaker, because I remember in particular that the one on between us and the US government, I was deeply involved. That was like over 10 years ago when I was in the tourism ministry. But you can see it only came to fruition, Mr. Speaker, only this year. So I would like to inform colleagues, and especially the Honorable Nyikalu was wondering what has been happening all those years, that these negotiations around BASA take a very, very long time. There's a lot of back and forth change of heart, and sometimes you sign agreements and the next year something new happens. And because of also change of business interest and trade interest, you find, countries changing overnight on a particular matter. Of course, consideration on security of certain countries. So you find it takes a while. But all the same, this is the route. And I know as a country, we hold the open skies policy as very dear and very important for us to grow and to be able to bring into our country more tourists, to bring into our country's FDA, foreign direct investment, to bring into our country employment, Mr. Speaker. And so I am happy, especially to see that we now have a BASA with Jamaica. It is one country that I have a very keen interest on. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, the other day, the reggae music was taken up as one of the cultural heritage by UNESCO, a huge feat for that music that all of us, especially if you grew up, since young age, all of us across the age in this house, I'm sure, are aware of the music, Mr. Speaker. So this also gives Kenyans a chance to visit that country. But I also know that Jamaicans naturally love to visit Kenya. They feel that they have a strong attachment to our country, Mr. Speaker. So this, of course, will definitely give us a chance to be able to visit and to know the countries, Mr. Speaker. Again, if you look at the different countries that this BASA agreement have been signed on, you can see there are countries that we are certainly having very keen interest in terms of trade, opening up new markets for our products also, and also opening a chance for them to come and invest here and to have more tourists visiting our country from these particular countries, Mr. Speaker. And so I really want to support that and also support the protocol amending air services agreement between Kenya and Turkey. I think Kenya and Turkey have been long-term trading partners. Certainly, a lot of our the products that we sell here locally, especially ladies' clothes, do come from Turkey. But I really hope that this trade can be made a bit more balanced, Mr. Speaker, because a lot of what we bring is not as much as we take there. I know coffee is a big thing in Turkey. So I really hope that as we open the skies between our country and these countries, we may be able to improve on our trade. We may be able to balance our trade between us and these countries, Mr. Speaker, and that we may make Kenyans realize that the world is becoming a small global village. And let me also add on to the issue of the cost of travel, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to see, especially our national carrier, Kenya Airways, really working towards ensuring that they give more affordable travel costs for Kenyans so that more can be able to travel, Mr. Speaker, and also we can be able to encourage others to travel from without Kenya into Kenya, Mr. Speaker. I know that by so doing, we will encourage more people to go out for trade. We'll find travel not being a barrier, but being a facilitative role to be able to get into those countries and to trade with them. And I believe that way Kenya will grow, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the committee for the job that they have done and hope that they can continue to do even better in the coming year. With those few remarks, I beg to support.
Shall we now have Honorable Tongi Nyagaka, member for Nyaribari Chache?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to support this agreement. Mr. Speaker, I support it because I believe it's the way to go. The world is becoming a global village, and all of us must be prepared to partake and have a share of it. And the way to do it, Mr. Speaker, is by reducing the amount of time people spend on travel, the amount of time people spend on transit, because that's where money is, Mr. Speaker. The agreement between Kenya and Jordan, between Kenya and Jamaica, between Kenya and the Bahamas, between Kenya and Turkey, Mr. Speaker, these air transport services would, for no doubt, with no doubt in my mind, Mr. Speaker, open up new opportunities for the country, open up new opportunities for our youth to get employment, open up also competition, Mr. Speaker, because we all know that competition creates quality services. Competition ensures that all of us are going to compete at the international level. And it also creates an opportunity for Kenya Airways to improve on their services, Mr. Speaker. Because again, when you are running on your own course and you have no competitor around you, You sometimes think you are the best when actually you are not. But when you have competition around you, preparing to take up your market share, if you are not upping up the game, Mr. Speaker, you improve by that much. And therefore, we think this will be an opportunity for all of us, not as a country, but even as a Kenya Airways, which is a diplomatic, which is a air diplomacy we're having as a country. Because wherever Kenya Airways improves on their services, whenever they're seen doing a good job, Mr. Speaker, Kenya is also respected to that extent because it's a good image of the country, and the entire world gets to know that we are also serious people. We can afford to give first-class services. Mr. Speaker, having said this, we also have a duty. As a Committee of Defense and Foreign Affairs, where I'm the Vice Chairman, Mr. Speaker, we need to be involved in some of these agreements because really that's our domain, that's our docket. And we understand some of the intricacies involved in bilateral issues. In future, we need to have all the stakeholders concerned, Mr. Speaker, involved in making these critical decisions. And that will go a long way to ensure that we have covered all the grounds, all the loopholes, Mr. Speaker, which might be there. We have sealed them out completely by way of having many people to look into what is going on or what is being signed into law. Mr. Speaker, we have seen some agreements which have been signed. And you look back and you wonder, what were the people involved really thinking about? Because the agreements sometimes we sign as a country are so skewed to the disadvantage of Kenya, Mr. Speaker. I'm informed of one agreement which has been signed between Kenya and some international companies on even power line, Mr. Speaker. And some of them are reasonably expensive, where we are being asked as a country to pay money for services which have not been rendered, just because our people who are drafting the agreement only looked at the one side without looking at being the devil's advocate. That's why when we involved many people, Mr. Speaker, we all are able to look at the same chart, look at the same page, and able to guide each other and enrich the agreement by that extent. But having said that, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that on the face of it, it is a good agreement, it is a good direction for the country, and we need to embrace and open up more opportunities. But even as we do that, we also need to look at the business opportunities and the viability of that agreement that we are signing. Because sometimes we might get to some countries with a population which is smaller than Kisii County combined, the Kisii Nation combined. The population of Kisii is about 4 million or thereabout. If you open up an agreement with a country like Kisii, which has a population of that number, honestly, Mr. Speaker, we don't have a very good competitive advantage in terms of the numbers, because we all know success of a business is about numbers, and the more the numbers, the more the population, the opportunity we have of making more business. Mr. Speaker, I encourage this. We need to embrace it. We look at it, some countries with bigger population also, to open up opportunities for their services so that we can, our people will have a chance to travel, benchmark, be able to compare notes of what's going on in the world, because what nowadays works elsewhere, it can also be copy-pasted and work in Kenya. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, Mr. Speaker, when we are starting new projects or when you're doing when we want to start fresh. We need to copy what China has done and a few other countries where they simply copy-paste what is working elsewhere and put it in, localize it and make it work for them. And I think as a country, we have the technology, we have the manpower, we have our sons and daughters who have gone to school well, who have the capacity to be able to do some of those things without having to start from scratch because somebody else has done it somewhere. All we need to do is to copy and adapt it, localize it, and get it to work for us. That way, we'll be able to reduce the unemployment that we're having today. Because the biggest challenge, I'm sure all of us have as members of parliament and as a country, is to create employment opportunities for the youth. And how else do we create those employment opportunities unless we get to these other countries and learn what is it they're doing differently? Because in a country like China with a huge population of 1.5 billion, the Speaker, they have reduced their unemployment to almost below 10%. If they have been able to do that with that kind of a population, Mr. Speaker, and our population is only 45 million, surely we should be able to do a lot more better than we have done. And I have no doubt in my mind that we have the capacity, we have the people, and we have the intention, the president and the deputy president, meanwhile, and all the stakeholders in the country, meanwhile, to ensure that we have created employment opportunity for our youth. Mr. Speaker, I saw as I wind up, I saw a very interesting article yesterday where the youth were saying that instead of creating employment for the old people, people who have worked for more than 10 years, Mr. Speaker, have got the experience and they have the money to open up a business. So the story of telling the youth to start up a business when they have no money and no experience to manage anything, I think we need to rethink it also. So the proposal was the people who have worked for a long time, maybe we need to relook at the retirement age. Unless in a very specialized area, we need to rethink about the retirement age so that we can get employment opportunities for the guys, the people who have finished school, so that we don't have the pattern that we're having today, where people go to school and they come home, parents are whining and complaining. They have spent their last coin to take their sons and daughters to school, and yet they have nowhere to take them in terms of employment. And even when we tell them that, oh, go and start up a be entrepreneur, start up a business, Mr. Speaker, they have no experience, the hands-on experience to run that business. They don't have the capital, but the people who have worked for a long time have the money, they have the experience, therefore we should encourage them to start a business, Mr. Speaker, instead of recycling them in employment when we have so many youths who are unemployed. With those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support this agreement, and I want to thank the Committee of Transport for the job well done, and we encourage that in future let us include or incorporate all the relevant committees in concern so that we have as many ideas put into this agreement as possible for the good of the country. I support.
Honorable Sophia, member for Ijara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to add my voice to this very important motion. Mr. Speaker, I'm supporting the fourth report, the motion on ratification on bilateral air services agreement between Kenya, Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas, and the protocol amending air services between Kenya and Turkey, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I want to on start congratulate and thank the Committee of Transport for bringing this report to the House, because it is important for us as members of this House and the country to know the agreements that our countries are going through, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of the instrument is to approve, Mr. Speaker, bilateral air service agreement between Kenya and various countries to enable Kenya air operators such as Kenya Airways provide scheduled air services and expand the existing routes, Mr. Speaker. In addition, the agreements allow foreign carriers access the Kenyan market, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what does this mean for the Kenyan government or Kenyan as a whole? It means an opportunity of expanding relationship between various countries, Mr. Speaker, and getting opportunities of business between the two countries, and getting a job creation for our youth who do not have opportunities now, and giving market to Kenyan products to various countries that we are going to enter agreement with, Mr. Speaker. And we will expand our tax base, Mr. Speaker, which will give an opportunity of having various activities that the Kenyan government can do as a result of these agreements that we are entering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bilateral agreement and their related understanding and arrangement, Mr. Speaker, generally regulates the rule of airlines, the ownership, the routes, the frequency, and the capacity of the flights of national carriers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this may also include issues of provision of services, the ground handling services, and others. These bilateral systems has its base, Mr. Speaker, under Chicago Convention that has regulated international airspace since December 1944, Mr. Speaker. It is as old as that, Mr. Speaker, and it is important that we adhere to regulations that have been signed and being proactive in getting access to other markets, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, currently as we are debating this motion, there are no carriers that operate schedules and air services to and from Jordan. Similarly, there are no airlines that have scheduled air services from Jordan to Kenya. The Jordan Authority, Mr. Speaker, on several occasions have requested our Kenyan authority to sign formal agreements so that they can start entering into force the agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, Bahamas have no scheduled flights to Kenya. Equally, Kenya do not have scheduled flights to Bahamas. But Bahamas has finished, Mr. Speaker, their internal constitutional and legal regulations and are ready to enter formal agreement with Kenya, Mr. Speaker. So we are asking our Kenyan government immediately to take that opportunity and to enter an agreement with the countries that have already finished their procedures, their constitutional and legal mandates, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenyan Airways is being overtaken by an Ethiopian airline, Mr. Speaker. Kenyan Airways was the pride of Africa. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, if it continues the way it is going on, and the way if you go to Ethiopia airport and you see the kind of traffic that is in Ethiopian International Airport, and you come to Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta Airport, and you see the kind of traffic, you will be shocked, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, it is high time the Kenyan government takes a proactive role so that we will be able to get the opportunities of getting markets and getting agreements that are signed between our countries and the other countries, Mr. Speaker, that are ready to enter business with us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we as a country need to be very serious. As a country, we need to get size of the opportunities that are existing, Mr. Speaker. We as a country must also look for alternative. We must not always think of the traditional way of doing business. We must proactively think outside the box so that we'll be able now to get actively engaged with all other countries, that we can enter agreements and partnerships so that they can come and do business with us. We need that business, just not today or tomorrow, but the way we want it. And with those remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support this motion, and I congratulate again the Committee of Transport for bringing this very important report to this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next is Honorable Martin Owino, member for Diwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the onset, I want to support this bilateral air transport agreement between Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas, and also the Turkey Amendment Protocol. Mr. Speaker, it is good to say that Kenya is ripe for business because the peace has come back to our country. And I want to say kudos to the Baba and also the president of this country. As was evidenced in Kisumu, Mr. Speaker, we are peaceful, and many countries are now rushing to do business with Kenya. That's why, Mr. Speaker, as I support this, it is important that the Committee of Implementation and the department concerned, including the ministry, must put structures that can allow our people to do business. The reason why those people have signed theirs and ready to come is that they have put their house in order, and they have made mechanisms that when we sign this, Mr. Speaker, they will be ready to go for business. For example, we don't want to be caught in a situation where ourselves are doing 30% and Jordan doing 70% because of their preparedness. So I really want to challenge the implementers of this agreement that when the whistle is blown, how ready are we? As I know you're a good runner, Mr. Speaker. When that button goes off, how ready are we to do business? And it is not only business of transporting people here and there. What we are talking about here that had lowered the fares in other areas is the cargo movement, what we sell to other people. For example, in Dewa, I'm ready, we have the best potato, and we like to ship out the potato chips. We have the best peanut, we'll be ready to ship out the peanut butter. This kind of arrangement must be in place for people to fit in. Mr. Speaker, talking about Jordan, it's not only business opening, but we also know we are all ready now to go to Canaan. History is rich in Jordan. The treacherous and high banks, when you reach Shittim and the legends, we can also compare with our legends. Like in my constituency, there's a legend called Gorma here. We would also like to sell through football to them. But this has to be made through what we call enabling factors so that the Ministry of Sports, Ministry of Tourism come together to see how we can fit in that trade arrangement. The Speaker was able to travel to Jamaica, driving over 50 miles of shores of resorts areas only. Jamaica is rich in tourism attraction. We need to move fast that we can also tap into that tourism attraction so that when they leave Bahamas and Jamaica, they can also come to our shores. Mombasa and Lake Victoria, Kisumu is also coming up as a tourist attraction. What I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to Turkey, we are talking now of Turkey suits, Turkey shoes overtaking Italian, but that is, there are goods coming into our land. What are we selling to Turkey? I think that is where we have to challenge the implementers of this agreement to ensure that we have a balanced trade, which can only be achieved by preparing yourself as the other player also does. If we fail to do that, Mr. Speaker, then we will be opening our airways for other people to come and do business. And we will be losing our hard currency if we are not prepared. So, Mr. Speaker, with those, I support this fully, but let us be prepared that when the whistle goes, we are ready to go to do this business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this time.
Honorable Kago Kimngetich, member for Chesumei.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. After listening to the members who have already contributed, I'm really convinced that we need to support these bilateral agreements. Kenya being where we are, we have quite a number of challenges, Honorable Speaker, and I believe that this is one way that we can move and ensure that we benefit our people. More importantly, trade is critical. Tourism is very, very important. And that is one way of adding value to this country. Because with money, with that which we are looking for the sake of improving the welfare of our people, this is the direction. I am convinced that research was done so that it benefits our country. And I want to believe that the most important and critical issue here is in terms of thinking about our young people. We have quite a number of students who have graduated from our universities. And I want to believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is one way in which we can solve the problems that have been endemic, and that is unemployment. And so I want to believe that Kenya taking this direction and us supporting these bilateral agreements is going to solve the problems that have been very perennial, especially for our young people. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I stand here to support. Thank you.
Very well. Shall we have Honorable Muri Fabian, member for Kangudo?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, to give me a chance to stand and support this adoption of air transport on bilateral agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Kenya and Jamaica, Kenya and Bahamas, and the Turkey agreements. Honorable Speaker, it is true. It is the right of our citizens under Article 39 of our Kenyan Constitution to have the free movement, either local or international. But because of different countries having different jurisdiction in terms of the law, especially laws pertaining overflight, our people have not attained the proper goals in terms of movement. Honorable Speaker, different countries have put different laws. The cry of open sky is for the nation to come together and agree on issues of overflight. The cases of Kenya is that we are in that country where we are saying that anytime we can be in second world. If today you see international interaction, international trend, international social welfare meetings, they really bring a lot of trend. They really bring a good culture for even a country. When you are making your laws, you make laws which are internationally interactive. You get to yourself you are in an economy which can always fit a neighborhood economy which the citizens have the knowledge of other countries, what they are doing. If today we say all the countries in the world to make what we call not one nation, but one world in terms of freedom of movement, we shall have development which will be faster tracked in terms of movement. Honorable Speaker, as we see in the case of Jamaica, Jamaica and Bahamas is a destination for tourism. If you see the case of Jordan, they have really specialized in terms of professional services, especially doctors and lawyers in export in different countries. And we are saying our flights, especially Kenya Airways, which is our national flight, to have the best carriers, to move and market Kenya in the country like Jamaica, in terms of Bahamas, which will attract tourism. It will also give the feeling that the other business people in those countries, they will feel the touch of Kenya by seeing Kenya Airways, the flight of Africa. You see again, the movement of people in terms of landing permits. It gives the issue of visas. It is now a request or the mandate not only to the government but to the Kenya Airways management to see how Kenyans will be getting visas easily for Jamaica, easily for Bahamas, and easily for Jordan. Again, it will also improve our services, especially sometimes when we are traveling. We are going to very long route because we don't have some bilateral agreement to different countries. So this thing I support. And I congratulate the committee for bringing the adoption of the report. And I say we should move faster to make sure that the Kenya is the first country to have the bilateral agreement, not only airspace, labor, export, and everything to all the countries in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I support.
Next is Honorable Manzo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to contribute on this very, very important motion on ratification of bilateral air services agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas, and the protocol amending air services agreement between Kenya and Turkey. Mr. Speaker, we are already in an agreement between Kenya and Turkey, and a lot of Turkish businessmen and Kenyan businessmen have now interacted. Our business people are getting a lot of supplies for clothes and among other goods from Turkey, because of the agreement we've been having with them, which now we want to improve. In fact, most of our 777s were leased to the Turkish airline when we were not making good use of them, but I believe with this improved now, the new agreement, we are able to do more business with Turkish. In fact, there are quite a Turkish establishments, and you remember Turkey was one time the Ottoman Empire. So it's a very, very wealthy country, which is interacting very well with us. In the case of Jordan, Mr. Speaker, you know, the airline serving Israel used to fly to Kenya some years back. it no longer does so. So for any Kenyan to access Israel, which is a big destination, especially over Christmas, a lot of Christians celebrate Christmas at Bethlehem, you find that it is easier now to fly to Jordan and then cross over to Israel, among other destinations in the Middle East. So it's a welcome move. And again, also, Jordan has quite a number of professionals and tourists who could also visit our country if there was a one-way flight, to that destination, just as it is happening now with New York. The moment you are able to fly to New York direct, then one is able to make faster connections with the rest of the world. And these particular planes, when they move with goods. Our tea, our coffee is able to be marketed, our flowers. And therefore, it's a very, very good thing to do, Mr. Speaker. And I believe the committee has done its work very well. It has made very good recommendations. Similarly with Jamaica, where, Jamaica is from a British colony, and we have got a lot of similar cultures. We have a lot of other cooperations and bilateral agreements with Jamaica. If we had a direct flight to Jamaica, or a flight also which lands into one of our other places, like we are already in the DRC Congo and the Brazzaville, you would imagine now if we could connect to Jamaica, how fast it would be. And the moment one lands into Jamaica, you are able to connect to the Caribbeans, and you are also able to go to South America. Therefore, this agreement is good, it's important, and it's going to make Kenya a very, very important destination, connecting, through the tropics and the Caribbeans and the Bahamas too, because Bahamas is not very far from Jamaica. And I believe this will really boost tourism, trade, and is very, very important, Mr. Speaker, for our nation to be able to participate in this. Looking at our current issues, such as lack of employment, the moment Kenya Airways is able to be more sufficient, to be able to land into all these destinations, and I want to thank them. Currently, Kenya Airways is very, very punctual. In fact, it is arriving ahead of time. It is leaving exactly as scheduled and arriving as agreed, and we still need to look for more. Looking at the future, we need to look for more other countries to cooperate with in the region, so that we can be able to reach more destinations in the region, such as Burundi, where our members participated in Yela athletics, which means bringing people of East Africa together. So we should be able to have more destinations, have more bilateral recommendations, and have more bilateral agreements be signed in the region, so that Kenya Airways can grow. And I want also to laud Kenya Airways for making a very wise decision to buy the Embraer 190. The Embraer 190 is a very efficient aircraft which can land several destinations with sufficient fuel, with smaller engines which consume less, very, very effective, and can be able to land in all these new destinations within Africa and even outside Africa if it refuels in one of the countries we are already operating from. And therefore, it's a welcome move. We are now a real pride of Africa. We are now connecting more, and we have many other agreements with other airlines. But if we go this way, the way the committee has proposed, it means we are now going to be more active, and our destination, which connects to many parts of the world, will become very popular, and therefore meaning more tourists to our country, more business in our country, more of our goods, and also interacting with other cultures, so that we can make it much better. More interaction with the Jamaicans, and you remember, Jamaicans originally come from Africa, and this is one place the slaves originated from Africa were freed from. So a lot of them love to visit destinations in Africa so that they can see the original land when they have time to travel and time to share their culture. So, Mr. Speaker, we would really like to support this great initiative. If you go to the recommendations, Mr. Speaker, they are very, and observations by the committee, are very good that currently no Kenyan carrier operates scheduled air services to or from Amashite Kingdom of Jordan. And then similarly, there is no airline from Jordan operating a scheduled flight between the two states. And this opens us to a new destination in the Middle East. And for purposes of those who go, the Muslims travel for, religious purposes, quite a number of them, we'll have an extra destination, fly straight from Kenya, without connecting through other countries, and from Jordan they will easily access the other destinations. And therefore, this is a welcome move, Mr. Speaker. We want to support the committee and congratulate it for work well done. The chairman and his team have done very well in a lot of activities relating to travel, related to transport, and this particular one, you have seen, Mr. Speaker, they have even made an effort to make sure that today, on a special day, this matter is discussed, and I believe in the afternoon we'll be able to pass it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Koskei Kipkoech, member for Sotik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this motion. I sit in the Committee of Transport Infrastructure. We've looked at this bilateral agreement, the ratification of bilateral air services agreement between Kenya and Jordan, Kenya and Jamaica, Kenya and Bahamas, and the protocol amending air services agreement between Kenya and Turkey. I would urge the House, because we've looked at it in detail, and it's a very important, protocol of agreement that we need to support, all of us. It opens up, Kenya and this other part of the world. Jordan in particular, they have a rich history, which we need to leverage on, and we need to learn a lot from. Mr. Speaker, I also want to put across that I've had an opportunity to travel to Turkey, and it's specifically Antalya, and we have a lot to learn from as a country. It's a moderate developed country, and this signing of an agreement will really help in helping this country move forward. I want to urge the House to support, and I want to thank the committee chairman for having led us into bringing this thing to the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Oduol Adhiambo. Professor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to this motion. Mr. Speaker, I would also at the outset want to say that I support the motion and to congratulate the Transport Committee for coming up with this report and enabling us to now get bilateral air service agreements between Kenya and Jordan, Jamaica, Bahamas in motion. Mr. Speaker, as I support this, I am aware that this is really in keeping with national development, because as a country, national development is the ability to improve social welfare, and this would be with regards not only to social amenities, quality education, but in particular with the issues of transportation. As I support, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with all the honorable members that opening the space will not only improve business, also allow for more tourists to come in, and therefore, indeed, increase revenue. However, Mr. Speaker, I must also point out that as we open airwaves and seek to improve, we want to serve and promote and protect the common interest of the Kenyan citizens in their different stages of development and need. I, in particular, Mr. Speaker, would want to observe that it is important that when we look at the policy framework and we look at the implementation framework, and when we in particular see what we will benefit, we do not just confine ourselves to economic costs and see perhaps the kind of trade and the sort of revenue that the tourists will bring, but Mr. Speaker, to also consider the impact that might not be positive if it is not properly mitigated. When we have this open air, we have much more developed and advanced ways of exchange. We also need to ensure that we have protective measures that will not mean that as tourists come in or as there is more room for Kenyans to go out to these countries, that they are not going out and they are not exposed to harmful practices that we have seen sometimes range on issues of trafficking and also in abuse of children. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, really just the perception that the young people have that when you go to another country, then you are definitely going to be advanced, and sometimes they end up in activities and in ways that are not supportive of their welfare. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I support, I must say that I am also urging and really asking that as a country, in terms of looking at our preparedness, we should not just think of the business framework and in our negotiations talk only about what it is that we are going to get in terms of economic and monetary values, but we must also think of our human capital, our children, our youth, our women, and we must also seek then to ensure that the policies that are in place to protect our nationals are implemented, and where they are not available or where there might not be sufficient infrastructural arrangements to keep our young people, our girls contented, or to keep them even aware of our values so that they do not get into the habit of copying and imitating others, that this does not take place. I want, Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, to urge that we once again remember that as a country, it would be important that a sense of identity and a sense of cultural values enables us to compete in any front, in any way, with any country, including business. We need, therefore, to also get back and look at our cultural framework, particularly our values, the way in which we get our children to get a sense of national ethos, to get a sense of who they are, and to get a sense of what it is that our country has, so as they exchange and interact with other nationals, they are also bringing to the fore what it is that Kenya offers, and they do not become vulnerable and lose their identity, and in some cases, Mr. Speaker, indeed lose their own lives or the value that they have. With this, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Honorable Onyango, Oyo member for Muhoroni.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the consideration. Mr. Speaker, I want to support this bill and to say that it is good in terms of enhancing relationship and business opportunities for our country. I have seen the countries that have been mentioned, which we have entered into a protocol, we are entered into agreement with, and we are opening up our air services and space for. They are very good countries, countries like Bahamas for tourism, and countries like Jordan for business, and a country like Jamaica will urge the authorities to ensure that we do objective business and we do not extend the other business that they like most, which is most likely corrupting the minds of our young children. My concern is that in the past, Kenya has been very friendly, opening up its spaces and allowing business opportunities with other countries. But when it comes to reciprocating, some of these countries have not done very well. A country like South Africa, which is a very friendly country, they give Kenyans very hard time in procuring visas. Even very serious people, including, are not stopping at the members of parliament. And yet, we give them very good consideration when they come to our time. We hope that these countries like Turkey, Jamaica, the Bahamas, that they will be friendly and it will be a win-win situation where the Kenyans who will be wishing to travel to those countries to do business or for tourism will be given free will to travel. I'm not saying that everybody must travel, but that there should not be a lot of rigorous attempts to deny people unnecessary visas when they are going for business, or people of substance like members of parliament or senior government officers, like is the case with South Africa today. Otherwise, I want to say that this is very welcome information. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the chair and his committee for working around the clock to ensure that this thing, this concept is driven to fruition and is brought before this House. With those few remarks, I want to support.
Very well, Honorable Nyango. Now, there being no further and other interest on this particular matter, I will now call the mover to reply. Honorable Chair.
I thank you, Honorable Speaker. And as I do reply, I want to thank honorable members who have made contribution, Honorable Speaker. I've sat here through, and I want to thank the interest of honorable members and the keenness in approving these agreements, Honorable Speaker. Number two, I also thank my committee members for burning the midnight oil, particularly to achieve this day, Honorable Speaker, which is a special sitting day. And this is very critical, and I thank my members. Speaker, as I do reply, I have listened to contributions from honorable members. They have made great suggestions, which I also want to add my voice, and as it goes to the executive, Honorable Speaker. Number one, the issue of fares of KQ has come out very clear, Honorable Speaker, from honorable members. It's a bit high, you know, and yes, we have listened as a committee, and we will take this information, and of course they have also heard, but I would like to assure the House, this has been a problem, and the thinking of how to reduce these prices, Honorable Speaker, are on high gear. The thoughts are on high gear, Honorable Speaker, and the KQ seeking for models on how to improve this, and of course to address competitiveness between KQ and other stakeholders. And the negotiations are going on, Honorable Speaker, and I'm very certain there will be a very positive conclusion in terms of how to deal with these fares. So maybe in due time, Honorable Speaker, particularly the next session, I'll be able to share with the House. I am very privy to the fact that KQ are talking on how to reduce these fares, Honorable Speaker. Number two, about the issue whether this is in the right place in terms of department. Honorable members were suggesting that maybe it goes to defense and foreign relations. Honorable Speaker, this agreement is squarely within its own original home. It is domiciled in this Department of Transport, Honorable Speaker. Because when you're dealing with the transport issues, it is actually Ministry of Transport. If you're dealing with KCA, that is actually Ministry of Transport. So all the negotiations which are here are within the purview, Honorable Speaker, of Transport Department. So it is not in the defense. So I want to assure honorable members that this is really rightly within its own house. Speaker, yes, honorable members are arguing that this negotiation should have taken a little bit faster process, like one which is before us of 2008, Honorable Speaker. I would like to assure the House that these treaties, Honorable Speaker, are not just plug in and plug out. They have serious ramifications if they are not scrutinized properly. And that is why it involves some time so that we really take this issue seriously, so that we don't end up approving or that we sign something that is contrary to our values as a country. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, that time is required for proper negotiations, so that by the time it is reaching us, then it has been done properly, Honorable Speaker. So I want to assure the House this was done properly. And yes, maybe in future it will be a little bit faster, but this time was taken for negotiations, Honorable Speaker. Another issue which I have also taken note, Honorable Speaker, is yes, this industry is properly and fairly regulated. That is the air transport. It's really seriously regulated, Honorable Speaker. And that is why nothing can happen before approvals. Nothing can happen before signing of these ratifications. And that is why I agree with the House and I agree with honorable members who all of them made positive contributions to these agreements, Honorable Speaker. But finally, I want to ask your indulgence that you don't put the question now, and maybe use standing order 53.3 that you may consider when you are putting this question, Honorable Speaker. And with those very many remarks, or few remarks, I beg to reply.
Very well. Yes, I agree with you. We'll put the question in a subsequent time. You know, Honorable Mohammed Sheikh, I can tell you have registered your interest to speak to this matter after the chair was replying, so we cannot open up that again. That is now settled. Honorable members, there being no other business. Order, Honorable Wamo Shoba. Honorable members, the time being 11:32 a.m., this House stands adjourned till today, Tuesday, 18th December 2018 at 2:30 p.m.